Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm joined by Daniel Sotir, Dan RS87 on Twitter, and Jedi Master Daniel96 on YouTube to discuss episode 5 from the Acolyte titled Night. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it's time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. Welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, everybody. Whew, what an episode of The Acolyte we were treated to this week. I mean, the fights, the choreography, the why, the what of it all. I mean, there's just a lot to discuss here. So I'm thrilled to have Daniel on the podcast to chat through all things The Acolyte, particularly episode 5 titled Night, which makes me really happy because, I was thinking last week with Greg about what this episode would be titled, and I was like, well, day, night, help me out here, guys. And then finally they gave us the ultimate title of Night to counteract day there. So I felt at ease and at peace and a little bit vindicated and justified when I saw that title appear when I opened up my Disney Plus to watch this episode on Tuesday evening, which was awesome if you ask me. Anywho, before we get into that, just want to say thanks to everybody for listening to our episode with Patrick Kottner about the George Lucas talk show and the new documentary, I Am George Lucas, a Connor Ratliff story. I hope you enjoyed that podcast and hope that maybe you checked out the documentary. It's really spectacular. So that I just hope that you're able to take some time out of your days to go rent that or buy that or anything like that. Like it's really awesome. I think it deserves a lot of great support on that front. So go do that. And of course, we're here to talk Cloud City gossip. But frankly, there's not a whole lot of news that has taken place in the Star Wars and Lucasfilm galaxy that I can compile over the last week here. I mean, obviously, the Acolyte is dominating so much of the conversation when it comes to the news that's coming out. But there was a big news drop, I would say, that happened today, which is that the classic game from 2002, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, is getting a remaster and is heading to consoles, which will be released on August 1st. So if you got an Xbox Series X, like I do, or you got a PS5 or a Switch and a PC, any of those, all of them perhaps, you can on as soon as August starts download this remaster, which looks pretty good, and they have added some new stuff to it. Boba Fett's kind of included, you can play as and all that. So there's just a little bit more there from just the regular game in 2002. So I hope they do it justice. I'll be intrigued. This is one of the games that I really loved as a kid growing up. So I'm more than excited to check this out personally as we roll into August here. But first off, we got to get through July 1st. We have a lot more Acolyte to get to before all that is over. So on the other side of the short break, we'll be back with our Acolyte Episode 5 discussion. Stay tuned, folks. All right, everybody, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. And boy, what an episode of The Acolyte we had this week. We had Day last week, episode 4, and now episode 5. Drum roll, please. I think you can all imagine what the episode title was going to be here. We kind of we manifested it last week. We now have the second part to this episode, or I guess the episode last week. The cliffhanger for all cliffhangers has now been concluded. We have Night. And to break down Night, I have first-time guest on Force Ghost Conversations. You may know him from Twitter as DanRS87. Also on YouTube, he has a wonderful YouTube channel, Jedi Master Daniel96. Welcome, Daniel Sotir, to the show. Daniel, how are you doing?
Doing good. What about you?
I'm doing great, thanks. And thank you for coming on the show to chat about this amazing episode. But before we get into that conversation, I want to know about your High Republic experience to this point. Have you been keeping up with the books? Did you maybe watch some episodes of Young Jedi Adventures? How familiar were you with the High Republic era before the show started?
I've read a good chunk of the books and comics. Like I'd say I've read a good chunk of Phase 1. I've read some of Phase 2, and pretty much the only Phase 3 thing I've read so far was the Eye of Darkness. So that's kind of my
Hmm.
High Republic. And I have watched, Young Jedi Adventures as well. So that's
Yeah.
that there as well.
Do you have a favorite book of yours from the High Republic so far?
I'm probably gonna go with Light of the Jedi just because how it introduced us to that era,
Yeah,
because I'd say that book had some really incredible world building.
I would say so too. I think Charles Soule really, it was a daunting task to introduce us Star Wars fans to this whole new era, all these new characters, this new villain group, and to do it in such a way that that book does. I mean, he knocked it out of the park, if you ask me. But what do you think of Eye of Darkness? Because I thought that personally, that was one of my that is my favorite Star Wars book now. And I'm just curious what other people are thinking as they've read through it.
From what I remember, I enjoyed it, but I'd have to probably do a revisit at some point. And I am kind of in the middle of a reread with Phase One. Like I did reread the first few books of, like a reread of the first few books, like earlier this year, and
Yeah.
then I just recently got back into a High Republic reread after High Republic hiatus of rereading.
Hey,
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, that's gonna be a lot because to reread. I assume you're starting from the beginning too, with like the Jedi again, and then going back through it. But
Yeah, because
there's a
I'm
ton
currently
of books.
rereading The Fallen Star.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah,
you're still in phase one, man. You got. I
yeah,
mean, they're great,
I
but I can
agree.
tell you just by looking at the amount of books that you have in just in ahead of you. I mean, you've got a ways to go yet, but it's a
I
fun journey to begin with. So I'm glad that
I
you're redoing it again.
yeah. And then I feel like I have some areas in phase two I need to catch up on, and then definitely phase three. So yeah,
Hey, it's great. It's a great time to be a Star Wars fan. I can tell you
I
that, especially
agree.
when it comes to both the Acolyte and all the books that are coming out. They're pumping them out like no tomorrow. It's a
I
lot of
agree.
fun.
Hmm.
Well, let's get into the Acolyte here. So, this episode takes place immediately after the events of the preceding episode, as I've kind of told everybody. If you didn't know already, it was called Day. So, when you saw that cliffhanger last week, what was your initial reaction? Because I feel like that was a really pivotal aspect of that episode leading into this one.
It definitely wanted me. I wanted definitely more. It definitely had that feeling. It
Yeah.
wanted to get you have more, and especially with this episode, it kind of wanted you to know what will happen next. As well.
Sure.
So
Sure.
yeah, definitely with that bit too. It just definitely wants you to know what happens next. Like especially with the cliffhanger from last week, and then going into this, it kind of did pay off.
Mm-hmm. Were you like sitting on your couch or whatever place you were at watching it and just going like, "No! How can you just stop it right there?"
Yeah, I was like, oh man, it's gonna be interesting who's gonna make it out of that fight. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. I remember like someone said on Twitter, like about with the what do you call it? Like with the episodes like going in, someone said like that he was gonna be mad if there was like if it was gonna be another flashback episode, but I mean I
Oh
kind
yeah.
of doubted they'd do it. I mean maybe they'll do one more with a flashback episode down maybe next week or in a couple weeks. I'd say before the finale,
Hmm.
probably with a
Yeah.
flashback.
Oh, we definitely have another flashback coming. There's more to
Yeah,
tell
yeah, because there's
of
the
that story on
yeah,
Brendock.
yeah, the Kelnaka one I think was one. Is there one with Kelnaka with a lightsaber that we're getting?
We've seen some of that in the trailers that they've had come out, so they definitely are teasing us with some more footage that's upcoming here, especially about that Brendock situation. And I
Hmm.
think just the whole May of it all, right? We need to see her side of things,
Yeah.
which will probably give more light to, well, now that we know that the events of this episode here will lead us to perhaps how she came in contact with who they're calling the stranger, as I saw in
Hmm.
Star Wars now, StarWars.com. Um, and of course the witch coven and all of that, and particularly what happened to the Jedi, right? There's a lot to be told there. The answers that we were given before just don't seem to be aligning up correctly. So I think it's gonna be really exciting to see how they play out the last 3 episodes here. And I can't believe that we're only 3 episodes to go in this season. I mean, wow,
Yeah,
where did the time
definitely.
go?
I know. It's like it felt like yesterday this was announced and we were getting ready, and now we're like halfway with season one of this.
Yeah, I know, and the weeks are just flying by here.
I
Like,
agree.
wow,
Yeah, because
they've
it
been
is.
doing a good job with
Because
this
would
show.
you say the Acolyte is pretty much going to become the new flagship show for Star Wars Disney Plus? Like since the Mandalorian's shifting to the bigger screen.
I would, I think that's a great observation there. I would actually say yes. We'll have to see. I think they're planning on doing a second season at this point. I think we'll have to see how this story officially plays out the first season here, because I hope that they didn't just leave stuff hanging, intentionally leaving it to be a second season here as well. In the event that it never happens, and then
Yeah.
there are some shows that leave, they don't fire all their bullets before the show ends, and then it just leaves fans wanting more, or at least have lingering questions here. So I think that this is an opportunity for Lucasfilm to take advantage of this era. Um, whether it be the Acolyte or they continue to title it something else and it just takes place in this time frame. That's certainly a possibility too. And to that point as well, I think Ahsoka offers up a opportunity as well to be the quote unquote flagship as well, since we know that's getting a second season, and the sky's the limit with that character too at this point.
Yeah. And then
Both have been super successful on Disney Plus as
yeah,
well.
true.
So,
And then Andor is pretty much just getting the second and final season to tie in Rogue One. And then Kenobi's pretty much a one-off because I mean, what else can you do in that era with,
man, I wish it wasn't a one off, but
yeah,
I'll
that's
take
just
what I
my
can get.
observation. Yeah. And then I think, the Mandal do you think they could do like kind of the Marvel like continuity like what the Mandalorian has done with its spin-offs? Do you think they'll do
Yeah,
that
it'll be real
MCU
interesting to
approach?
see. It'll be interesting to see what they do after the movie comes out,
Yeah.
because do you go from the cinema back to Disney Plus? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question
It's
too.
tough to do a movie and then do like a season 4 or 5, right? Like, it's hard to
Yeah.
tell what they do with that, because there's obviously, if it makes money, well, I think that's the thing, right? Does it make money at the box office, right? If it makes money, then they'll keep putting them out in the theaters. They'll make a sequel, a trilogy, whatever they need to, right, for that.
Hmm.
If it doesn't make money, then they'll say, "Great, this character lives on Disney Plus henceforth and forever."
Yeah.
So,
Now
um,
is yeah, kind of wondered with like the High Republic, with going into the Acolyte, I was kind of wondering like how many like people who don't read the books or comics would gravitate
yeah,
to
there's a
it,
lot. Yeah,
to it. And I
yeah,
think,
and it seems like people have been taking heart to it, right? I think a lot of people have
mhm,
really resonated with these characters. There's a lot to pull from when it comes to that, and I think people have enjoyed seeing this era as well. Probably the reintroduction of the Phantom Menace, in theaters, was probably a great way to introduce this to a lot of people. Seeing that special extra scene at the end of that, and then they've done a great job marketing this show to people
yeah,
so far, and I think it's lived up to the hype so
no.
far. So
Yeah,
who
I'd
who knows?
agree
I
with
think
you there.
it has an opportunity to be really successful for Lucasfilm and Disney overall. But, well, time will tell. Time will tell. Of
Yeah.
course, I want
And
to
then
see how the series concludes first and
I agree
foremost.
with you there. And I think pretty much with this discourse, it's pretty much, I think we're back. I definitely feel like we're back in the Last Jedi discourse era again.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
for sure,
but
for sure. There's no
definitely with
doubt about
that.
it. I mean,
I mean, without going into further detail, but I just had to sort of bring that up. I mean, we all know the story of it.
yeah, I mean, like, look, there's people out there that are gonna hate anything and everything just because there's certain people are attached to it. Um, and it's a vocal. I'm just say now it's a vocal minority. So
Hmm.
there's more of us than there are of them.
Yeah,
It takes less energy to hate than it does to love something. Um, so it's easier for them just to spout negativity and all that into the world, and it takes more energy to combat that. And they're not changing their mind anytime soon. And they either watched it and then hated it, and we still get the engagement and viewership from that, so it's a benefit to the
yeah.
Acolyte,
Hmm.
or they don't watch it and they're making hateful claims based off of nothing, and then their point is invalid, frankly. So That's where I'm looking at it. And just at the end of the day, love what you love, hate what you hate. It's not going to change my opinion, and I'm not going to
I
change their
agree with you
opinion.
there. Yeah, I mean, it's
So
meaningless
it's
what
not worth
people
my
think.
energy to fight it. Yeah.
I agree with you, yeah. And I think we've rambled pretty much in areas on this.
Hey, we're here for a good conversation, my
I
man.
agree.
Uh,
Yeah.
let's get back to the Acolyte here, and particularly this episode. And full spoiler warning to anybody at home that hasn't seen episode 5 Night yet. I mean, come on, what are you doing? Go watch the episode now on Disney Plus, and then come right back to this podcast here. You've been forewarned about spoilers beyond this point. So, Daniel, this whole episode is mostly a lightsaber duel between the dark side user, who now StarWars.com has dubbed the Stranger, and the Jedi. So, what do you make of the fight choreography that was employed within this episode in particular?
I really did like this choreography. And I know, like, like the headline was, the goal was, it was trying to top the prequels and all that. But yeah, so I mean, I'd say it lived up to the hype on the choreography. And I think it definitely was
Yeah.
something to see, that go back to that
Yeah,
as
I
well.
think it was really, really awesome to see this again. Like, especially after seeing the Phantom Menace on the screen again. And, like, I wish I could have seen this episode on a big screen. Like,
I
that would have
agree.
been so cool.
And
Like it
especially,
was so
oh, go
wild to
ahead.
see these characters like go off on like this, we have been blessed in this last episode, and in my opinion, with like such a wonderful style of fighting that we haven't seen in the Disney era yet.
So you with the fighting, yeah, definitely as you said with the Disney era. I know like some people like if you went into the whole prequels versus sequels debate on who had better fights and that kind of stuff and all that. Like I think the Last Jedi throne room fight is probably the best we've seen in lightsaber combat
Mm-hmm.
on the film side.
Yeah,
Like definitely that bit with the Rey and Kylo versus the Praetorian Guards for the live action
sure.
Disney cinematic side, but definitely in the live action TV, I'd say this is definitely the best, and especially in the hand to hand combat as well, in the non lightsaber
Mm.
parts too. And I mean, we've seen it in the opening episode of the Acolyte as well with May and Indara. That was pretty good. Even seeing that on the big screen was cool as well for that clip they
Yeah,
showed for the Menace, screening.
yeah. It was like a force kung fu
Yeah.
in a way, which it's super new to Star Wars, the way that they presented it. And this episode was such a great throwback to the prequel choreography that I think a lot of people have been longing for,
Yeah.
and particularly in this show, because it makes sense. This is the Jedi at their height. They should be uh, masters of the craft. We saw Jackie training with the her lightsaber, doing lightsaber training, I guess, in episode 4, leading up
Yeah.
to this. So the seeds were laid for this in
Hmm.
the preamble episodes, of course, and it paid off. Like, and I've seen a ton of behind the scenes footage that they've showed of like the whole crew just getting together and training for weeks uh, with this choreography that they executed perfectly, in my opinion, when it translates to the on-screen presentation. Like, it makes the story, and it doesn't feel over bloated in a way either. Like, if there was too much action, right, some people could use that as a criticism against it, but it's action with meaning, which I think is also a really powerful thing that they were able to
Yeah.
pull off in this episode.
I'd agree with that too. Like, because it did, serve the purpose and was, part of the story that they would come across the dark side user. And then you have the bit where Jackie and May fight, where Jackie's trying to handcuff May.
Yeah, yeah, that was really good too. And um, I completely forgot about that sequence. Yeah, you're right.
True. And then that
There's
bit,
all that, and oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, and then there's the bit where Jackie goes to fight the dark side user and uses Kelnaka's lightsaber as well,
Mm-hmm.
hers and Kelnaka's in that sequence too against the mass figure, which we will get to eventually, the identity.
Yeah, she held her own against them. Like, that was, I was really proud of Jackie in that sequence, and of
I
course we'll
know.
get to her fate in a couple questions here. But for a brief moment there, I was like, she's gonna do it. she's gonna do it. And then
Oh
my
yeah.
heart got pulled away from me.
I know, and I was saying with Saul, I was like, please don't die, please don't die, Saul.
I tell you, we'll have a question about that. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. So just
Yeah.
put a pin in the soul of it all.
Okay.
So we did, get to a little bit of here about our next question. But amidst the fighting, the helmet of the stranger, this dark side user, reveals themselves to be none other than Qimir. Qimir? I don't know how they're pronouncing it these days. So, were you expecting this dark side user to be revealed in this fight? Did you also think that it would be Qimir? 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 What?
I didn't. I know, like, some people theorize it would be Qimir, but at first I thought
hmm
it'd be a little predictable. But the way they pulled it
Yeah.
off, I think, was in a good way. Like a more,
Yeah.
for us to be shocked as an audience, like us to kind of resonate with how the characters would be shocked too. So I did feel like they
hmm
pulled that off too. Like for us as an audience, and then for us to kind of resonate with the characters being shocked that it's him, and same with May being shocked. Like I know
Yeah.
some people
Yeah.
theorized it, and I said it in my review for episode 4. I'm like, I think it's a little predictable, but who knows? But it ended up being Chimera, and I'd say they did a good job than I expected it if it was Chimera. I thought it would sound a little predictable, but they managed to pull it off in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I
What?
think that he was the most Uh, not necessarily the obvious answer, but the one that made the most sense
Hmm.
based off of how everything played out. Who else would have been in the forest there in quick proximity, unless like some other, the master, the stranger was like just walking right behind them the entire time, right? It what's presented on screen didn't showcase that it could potentially be anyone else at that point that could just swoop right in. Um, and I think it helps. Like, of course, a lot of people were theorizing it, as you noted, along the way, uh, kind of pinpointing certain things in the episodes that kind of like, oh, this indicates that it could be him. Um, I think people were doing like vocal analysis too from the first episode. There was the sequence in the second episode where Osha tries to go undercover as May, and then he has that kind of that brief moment where he's like, "Oh, you look just like her," and he had these moments where he would like turn it on and off, where he would be like full Chimera and then the stranger, right? This duality within him. So I think that the crumbs were there too, and for people that maybe didn't see the reveal coming or they weren't expecting it, I think it's a good move because then they can go back and watch the other episodes, and then they can like pinpoint like, oh, okay, I see it here, I see it here. I think that'll be really good for the rewatchability of this series, especially for people if they weren't expecting it, which I think is cool. Plus, Palpatine was right there at the forefront of everything in the prequel trilogy, so it also just pays kind of homage to that story as well.
Hmm.
Which again, this is certainly in the same vein of that. Leslie Headland has made it no surprise that she loves the Phantom Menace and the prequel trilogy. So I see it fully making sense in my end that it's Chimere. But here's a question to you, Daniel: Is that, do you think this was too early, potentially too early to reveal this character? Like, do you think episode 5 was the right point for this? Obviously, we'll need to see what the rest of the story is, but I guess, were you expecting them to be revealed so early?
I was thinking somewhere at the halfway point or the near
Mm-hmm.
the end, but I mean we're at the halfway point, so I mean it did seem appropriate of us sort of
Yeah.
being, because we are at the halfway point with episode 5 and stuff, and the way this episode ends can kind of set things into motion as well.
Sure, sure. I think it's like we're spoiled with so much other content across all these different streaming platforms now, and a lot of them employ this like mystery box storytelling, um, where they will spend all 8, 9, 10 episodes, whatever the series is, and they have kind of one through line mystery throughout the entire series, right? I thought that this might have been the potential for that, but I'm also glad that they got the cat out of the bag, because now this is more interesting because he doesn't have to hide behind a mask anymore, or maybe he does hide behind it still, but we at least as an audience know who's behind the mask. So how does that change his interactions with like a who he thinks is May, but that'll be Osha. Um, I think it'll be much more of an interesting next couple 3 episodes, probably 2 episodes, because I assume one will be um, a back a rewind episode in a way. Um, so it's going to be real interesting, I think, now that the cat's out of the bag again, and how they can just weave this through together, especially knowing that Soul knows who this person is and what does he tell the Jedi Council, what doesn't he tell the Jedi Council. There's it's too early to speculate on what will happen and how it affects canon and all that stuff, but it certainly offers up a lot of fun and interesting possibilities. It's going to get me tuned in next Tuesday night for sure to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. Like when he was asking, like, who are you? And then, when he said, Qimir slash the stranger, before the mask reveal, he says, like, kind of there is a familiarity. I thought he was going to be like a former Jedi, like, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. I thought, oh, maybe there's a former student. I mean, no,
I
because
mean, it's
even,
still a possibility.
yeah, true. But even though Osha was technically, you know, Soul's Padawan before Jackie, so I thought if there was a third one, there wasn't any indication, but if he was
Mm-hmm.
someone that was part of the Jedi, that's what I thought was going to happen. But in the end, it turned out, to be Qimir, but and all that. And then, I mean, we all know he has Force abilities and all that. And it'll be interesting to learn, like, where he came from. Like, could they show it in a rewind episode? Or could we get a Qimir novel or comic? I think would be good as well.
Yeah.
That would be interesting as well. What happens if the High Republic Phase 4 is like backstory to stuff from the Acolyte?
Hey, who's to say? Who's to say?
It's a
There's a great
possibility.
question. Possibility. I think the opportunities are endless when it comes to this era. We'll
Yeah,
see how Phase 3 concludes, and then if they want to kind of bridge the gap to this, because there's obviously Vernestra Rowe, that's a character that's introduced in the High Republic books. There's also an opportunity for more characters from that era to be fleshed out in this and a potential season 2 as well, which I think is
that,
also another fun opportunity that presents itself because of that. And he does say too, he's like, I don't have a name when Soul asks him who he is. Right? He's like, I don't have a name. You Jedi may call me Sith. Uh, do you think that the stranger Qimir is a Sith, or do you think that he's maybe a Knight of Ren, just a dark side user, something else? Where does your mind go at this point?
I mean, he could say maybe, as maybe Sif, because he doesn't have like a Darth title or
Mm-hmm.
anything. The Knight of Ren idea, I'm not opposed to. I think it could kind of expand more on what the Ren title means. I think that would be a good
Sure.
opportunity, sort of, to even expand upon lore that was established in the sequels that we don't know about yet. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
would be another good way to put, like, what does Ren mean, I
Yeah.
think that would be a
Yeah.
good possibility there. I'm not opposed to that idea, actually.
Well, I think the helmet matches.
Exactly,
That
yes.
is right in line with their lineage, or at least what their culture kind of is. The Knights of Ren, that is. I'm all for it. I'm all for him being a Sith too, right? I think
Yeah,
the thing that people were like, if they are a Sith, I need them to take out a lot of people.
yeah,
Like, right, there can't be a lot of survivors of this thing, of this interaction, right? They just can't be 7 people that interact with this Sith Lord and then make it out alive and then live to tell the Jedi Council. And then, there's a lot of questions about that. But the fact that really only one Jedi survives this whole ordeal, and we still don't know, we have 3 episodes yet to find out what their fate is, and if they even tell the Jedi Council, right? There's a whole lot of inquiry about that could potentially be discovered. So it's not necessarily off the table, But I do think that, again, when people just see red lightsaber, they're like, yes, it's a Sith or a dark, it's a Sith. But it's like, no, just because you have a red lightsaber doesn't mean you're a Sith. It means you're a dark side user to some
Yeah, I
degree. Like
agree.
Baylan Skoll wasn't a Sith. Shin Hati wasn't a Sith. They were something else, and they had mostly red lightsabers, if you ask me.
I agree.
So
And
they
that's the
they
same
stand up.
thing too, like the Inquisitor.
Mullins, Aja Press also, yeah. Inquisitors
Yeah,
weren't Sith. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Kylo Ren's not a Sith
Yep,
either.
Knights of Ren are just dark side users, right? They're
Yeah.
not Sith lords. And this could showcase an opportunity for introducing something else into the Star Wars canon too, which I think is
Hmm.
really cool.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot more time yet to figure out who and what these characters actually are, but I think the opportunities that present themselves in this matter are almost endless, which I think is also really cool for Star Wars.
I agree with you
So
there.
the fighting within this episode reached like a brutality level, I would say, that hasn't been seen since the prequels. And we kind of alluded to this already, but among the dead include young Jecki and Yord. So which to get pretty plainly here, which of these Jedi passing was more shocking to you and why?
Whew, that's a good one. Actually, this one I'd say is the really good question. Like, who was more shocking? And I mentioned earlier, like, I prayed for Saul not to die, which in the end he does survive, which is good. But
Yep,
I
he
mean,
makes it out, but these other two,
Jackie, whew, I'd say that one was quite a shock because I feel like we're so used in Star Wars seeing the Master get killed than the Padawan, which
yeah,
in this effect it was the opposite way.
yeah, yeah, three, you know, 3 hits to the chest.
Yeah. And then there was like,
Wow.
and then that bit where Qimir snapped Yord's neck was, brutal
Oh,
too.
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I can only
I mean,
imagine how that's going to mess with Osha, because she was like the one pressing to go back. And, you know, she may feel guilt or responsibility for that in some way. That'll be an interesting aspect of her character moving forward. But yeah, that Yord thing. Oh, I'm surprised that Disney Plus let that happen on their streaming platform.
yeah. Yeah, it's a good thing there. I know that's what some people will say like about Andor. They'll be like, you know how Andor is so dark and gritty. People will say, "Oh, I can't believe they got to let Tony Gilroy make something dark and gritty with Andor." I bet they'd probably say the same. "Oh, I bet I'm shocked Disney, got to let Leslie Headland make this."
Yeah, yeah. I'm, probably just one of them would have been fine, but to do both, that's a lot
Yeah.
in one episode.
Hmm.
Like, it's something that's also primarily supposed to be for kids, or at least
Yeah.
of age and audience where kids can largely view it.
Hmm.
That's a lot to see just someone just full on neck break.
Yeah.
That's a
Because
new
I
one for
mean,
Star Wars too. Even
true.
I can't
Yeah.
recall in any other canon that someone has been just like their neck is broken like that.
Yeah, we never seen it in the movies or anything, or the other shows, or even in animation.
Hmm.
I mean, we've seen
Yeah, yeah.
stab. We
Animation's not touching that one.
I mean, if you're Clone Wars, they've shown stabbing. I mean, in that regard,
Hmm.
and then even in the movies, we've seen stabbing and stuff and all that. And then the only, I'd say, bloodiest scene we've seen in the movies is A New Hope, where Obi-Wan chops that guy's arm off in the cantina. That's the bloodiest we've
Sure.
probably seen. But other than
Yep.
that,
Yep.
yeah, the neck snapping is pretty new to Star Wars, as you said.
Yeah, it helps when the lightsaber like cauterizes the wound right then and there with how hot it is. It
Yeah.
usually takes away a lot of the blood, but yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that New Hope sequence, and frankly, just the this rivals of the Disney era. I would say maybe that Rogue One Vader sequence, but that's not a
Yeah.
lightsaber battle. That's just a bunch of poor soldiers getting stuck in a hallway that have no hope in getting out. So, and then these Jedi at least have the opportunity to fight back, and what happens is horrendous on their part. They just get
Hmm.
slaughtered entirely,
And then only one made it out.
and only one made it out. Yes. Technically one Jedi, yes, but also Qimir also survives the ordeal, and May and Osha as well. Somehow Qimir survives all of the huge moth cicada creatures trying to take him up into the atmosphere, and then falls back down without a scratch on him. So even May and Osha survive the ordeal. They have a short embrace before May turns on Osha once more and then knocks her unconscious.
Hmm.
And then during that time, May cuts her hair and swaps clothes with her sister. And then she goes off with Master Soul, leaving Osha, who looks like May now because they swapped clothing, with Qimir. So this, Daniel, what do you think happens? What is Osha's plan here? First off, or sorry, what is May's plan here? And where do you think the story will go next?
Whew, this is definitely another good one. When I was reading the questions you sent me yesterday, and then this one, yes, like I'd say that sequence where, you know, May is in disguise as Osha to go with Saul, and then Osha's unconscious.
Yeah.
It's definitely a sequence to get you off guard because it makes you think at first that
Mm-hmm.
Osha wakes up, but because I did a rewatch last night, and it definitely is something worth on a rewatch. Catching is because when Qimir looks at Osha, you don't see the little tattoo marking that
Yeah.
um, May has on it. So that's definitely one way if you look very closely. And
Sure.
then I'd say May does a pretty good job at kind of hiding that marking because Saul will know. And then, when you look at Basil, he's like has the scent to kind of,
Mm-hmm.
get it too if you look at Basil closely as well. So that's another thing there. So yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
Basil's the real wild card on this one. Like, I don't know what's going to happen next to that one. Like, can Soul speak the language that only Yord learned? You know,
yeah,
can they figure out if Basil's trying to tell them that this person isn't who they seem to be? I don't know. I think that's
yeah.
going to be an interesting conversation, but I like the storytelling aspect here of the possibility of them living in each other's shoes and seeing something from the different perspective here, right? Because Osha, for the last 16 years, has been with the Jedi and then has seen them as her family. And then presumably May has been either since the last 16 years or for a long period of time has been training with the stranger here, the Qimir, the dark side user. So they're both now trading places and get to see how the other one lived for a while there, and maybe that'll help in understanding the other more or just learning. I think for an audience it's going to be really fun because we'll see the different perspectives here on this one, and maybe we'll just learn so much more about dark side mythology and the Jedi, particularly Soul's past when it comes to this sequence. uh, I think that's going to be on the table for sure within the next couple of episodes.
Yeah, it's a good point there, and I think it'll be interesting. I'm thinking maybe May will use it to kind of get insight to the Jedi, maybe like she's a mole or something that makes a report to
Yeah,
Qimir on a way that they could destroy him or something.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a
maybe.
good possibility. And then a little backtracking to episode 4, because like she says about surrendering to the Jedi, and maybe that could be a way where she could kind of tell him everything
Hmm.
about what Qimir slash the stranger is. Maybe we'll
Yeah,
learn the identity or something, and maybe if we get, presumably another flashback episode, we could learn about how May came into contact with Qimir. Like, how did she survive the fire on Brendok? Because we saw
yeah,
how Osha survived, and that's how she presumed May to be dead. But in the end, we could probably see how May comes into contact with Qimir, which would be a good way to learn there, whether it's next week or the week after. Just have to wait
hmm
and see. So I do think that's another good possibility there. What about, I know you brought up good possibilities, how we could see the different perspectives. So that's
hmm
definitely my stance there.
yeah. I'm just envisioning like we see May at the tree there from episode 3 where it ends off at, and then just seconds later a younger Qimir shows up and is like, "Hey, saw your whole, you're alone now. Come on over here, learn some dark side stuff." Maybe he was sensing some dark side energy on her. And I think there's a lot more to be said about the relationship, perhaps between Soul and this dark side user, because he's like, you seem familiar, right? There's some familiarity there, so I think we got to learn a lot more about what's going on in that sequence as well. And Basil, again, that true wild card here. What are we doing with that? How's he going to come into play here? I don't know. I'm Team Basil, so I gotta find out what happens to
I'm
my
with
man.
you there too on Basil. Yeah, and that's another thing too. Maybe he'll oust May as a mole or something, and that's where the Jedi will really arrest her or something. Like she'll be in a
Mm-hmm.
holding cell or something. Like
Yeah,
they'll.
perhaps this is how she uses this as an opportunity to, um, whatever this final trial was for becoming an acolyte. Was it to, they said you kill Jedi without a weapon.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe she figures out what that means and does it against Soul. And as much as I hate to say it, I think this might be leading to that. So that
Yeah.
again, there's no way of getting out that there's this dark side user out there in the world. Something mysteriously happened to these Jedi, and there's no trace of what happened that they can figure out what it was. Um, I don't know. There might be a dark future ahead for this show,
I
which kind
agree.
of makes sense given the subject matter.
Yeah, true. And I think that could be it too, because she's succeeded in killing Indara and Torben, but it looks like we all know Qimir killed Kelnaka, so he pretty much did that for
Yeah,
May. Because I mean, we all know
yeah.
Kelnaka had lightsaber markings across his chest,
Mm-hmm.
but it looks like May has to, pretty much that's all she has left to kill is Saul.
It's the only one left on the hit list, and he's right in grasp in her grasp right there. So
Yeah.
may not be looking good for the Soul Patrol here.
Yeah. They're probably next on the chopping block. And that's the thing.
I would say so. Send out some
Too.
tissues to the Soul Patrol.
Oh yeah, because I saw people post on Twitter the justice for Jackie
Yep.
on that too. Like I saw, is that what they got from the swagman, like from the Acolyte box people have been getting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. They've been getting some tissues in the last couple of days here in response to this episode, which was a hard one. It's a hard one to watch if you really connected these characters, which I think a lot of us did.
And another thing is, he said if we go back to another flashback, eventually, maybe we'll get the motivations why May
Mm-hmm.
was trying to kill these four Jedi, why they were on the targeting.
Yeah,
I mean, we all know they all came to Brendok in episode 3 and all that. So you have that bit there. So yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And one last thing I wanted to say about the fight too was I did see that on StarWars.com that the stranger, the dark side user, had those gauntlets on his arm. It was made out of a material called cortosis, which is how he was able to stop the lightsabers from working when they would hit it or hit his helmet or something like that. And then that's how they briefly stopped for a moment in time, which is something from canon from the Thrawn Alliance's novel. So I'm glad to see that in a live action sense here because of that. So go read that book if you want to learn some more.
Oh yeah, I've read it before. I mean, I think I read it like 6 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it's one that's probably been on the shelves for a lot of people for a while because
Yeah,
it came out a long time ago before the pandemic even, and
yeah,
uh, always a good chance to revisit stuff. So I'm glad that Canon always that's why they have the story team, is to bring stuff back into the fold that maybe they
yeah,
weren't thinking about. I also loved how the lightsaber, he was able to break it into two. Well, I don't necessarily love it because that's how I used it to defeat Jackie there pretty handedly, but it was pretty cool to see that in the moment before enacting the deed that he did.
yeah. And I like how he kind of has that pose where he's holding the two lightsabers, and then he looks all sleeveless, and it just makes him look badass.
Yep, yep. And he was like, "What's its name?"
Yeah.
Oh man, dehumanizing Jackie. Not a good look, man. Not a good
Oh
look.
yeah. Not a good look for the
Well,
Jackie Jam.
yeah, not a good look for them, and never gone but never forgotten. Yord and Jeki, and as well as other Jedi that were on, nameless Jedi that were on Kofar here,
Yep.
dealing with this situation here. Daniel, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about in regards to this episode before we close up here?
I think we've covered quite a good chunk of it, you know? I think we've
Yeah,
speculated on areas, what could happen next, what could happen down the line. I mean, I think we got a good overview, would you say?
I think so as well. And then with that, go ahead and tell the folks where they can find you online, and your YouTube channel, and how they can stay in contact with you if they want to continue the conversation.
All right, you guys can follow me on Twitter, DanRS87, Instagram, JMD96_YT, Facebook, JediMasterDaniel96, Blue Sky, Jedi Master Daniel 96, and you can also subscribe to me on YouTube, Jedi Master Daniel 96. So that's where you guys can find me.
Wonderful. And to the folks at home, thank you for listening to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. We'll, of course, be back next week to chat about episode 6, whatever that's about. If it's a flashback or if they're continuing this journey, we'll find out and we'll talk about it. So make sure you're still subscribed and continuing to follow us on all the social media platforms so that you don't miss an episode. And of course, we'll be back very soon in your podcast feeds. And until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.